Okay, good morning and namaste to all of you. Let's start our Saturday class, Vivekachudamani, with some prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhubhuva Swaha, Tatsavitra Vareneyam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Diyo Yo Naha Prachodayat, Asto Ma Satgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamya. Om Sahna Bhavatu, Sahna Bhunaktu, Saviryam Karvavahi, Tejasvinavadhitamastu, Ma Vidveshavahi. Om Shanti 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 Om. So Vivekachudamani, my notebook says we are on verse number 353. So your book might have a different number. So it starts like this. Itham vipaschit sat asat vibhajye nishchite tatvam nij bodh drishtyaha gyatva swam atmanam akhand bodham tebhya vimukta swam eva shamyati. Itham means thus. Vipaschit, the wise person. Sat vibhajye, discriminating between the real and the unreal. The difference between those two. Nishchite, establishing. Tattvam, truth. Nij bodh drishtya, by the insight of his knowledge. Gyatva, realizing. Swam atmanam, his own self. Akhand bodham, the unbroken knowledge. Akhand. See, khand means part. Akhand, unbroken, whole. Tebhya, from them. Vimuktaha, freed. Swayam ev, himself. Shamyati, becomes. Thus the wise person, discriminating between the real and the unreal, establishing the truth by the insight of his own knowledge, and realizing his own self to be unbroken knowledge, becomes free and himself attains peace. We saw that in the last two verses, he was explaining to us the things which are unreal. Okay. And then the previous verse, he was explaining it to us what is real. So very clearly what is unreal and what is real. So this takes a rational thinking, very close observation. This is the sadhana. And this sadhana is done with the process of discrimination. You are using your intellect. So the vision of God, the vision of Brahma, the vision of real, ultimately we experience it. But we have to churn it with our mind first. Then you experience it. And when a person has realized that own self to be pure knowledge, it's that this is the pure. Pure knowledge over here really means that higher knowledge, the intuition, pure knowledge. Then he says you get liberated from the ignorance. Because that avarna, the veiling, has been lifted up with the help of the pure knowledge. And sure, when the avarna is removed and you see what the reality is, what happens? Agitations are gone. The vikshepa. And these are the obstacles. Vikshepa and avarna. So they have been removed. So all obstacles completely get eliminated when we really have a subjective experience. Subjective experience. So three things he is telling us. Through intelligent discrimination between the self and the non-self. That's what real and unreal is. Self is the only real thing. Everything else is unreal. Okay. Number two is detachment from the unreal. Why get attached to something which is temporary? And then by complete identification with the real, the self. That's all he's telling us to do. Very simple. But first we got to discriminate completely. So far, we have made the temporary. We don't know what is temporary, what is permanent, and we have gotten so attached to the temporary. And the temporary, the nature of the temporary is to change. And that's where our mind keeps on fluctuating. Temporary is temporary. Do not get attached to it. That's what he's telling us. So this is like a three-part in the last few verses, three-part sadhana. Then he says in the next verse, Agyan hriday granthe nishesh vilyaha tada samadhina avikalpena yada advait atma darshanam. Agyan is the ignorance, and hriday granthe, you are all familiar with that. Knots of our heart. Okay. So of the heart's knots of ignorance. Agyan hriday granthe. Nishesh vilayaha. Complete destruction. Vilay is like a villain, destroyed, gone. Tada means then, samadhina avikalpen, by the one-pointed samadhi. Yada means when, advait, non-dual. Atma darshanam, the vision of the self, Atma darshan. He says when the non-dual Atma is realized. In that Nirvikalpa Samadhi, Samadhina avikalpen. So avikalp is a nirvikalp. There's no vikalp left at all. So when the non-dual Atma is realized in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the heart's knots of ignorance are completely destroyed. Where did it start? Discrimination between the real and the unreal. Then you got to constantly practice. Keep on doing the practice. And ultimately attain that absolute Nirvikalpa Samadhi. You gain the experience of non-dual because there's no vikalp. There's only one. That's it. That one everywhere. And that is the universal reality actually. But we haven't experienced that reality because we haven't gone through the first step yet. So when the mind is completely quiet, you really go into that quietude. You experience that infinitude. You experience that Brahma. That's where the yogis, they came up with those sayings, Aham Brahmasmi. Okay, those are not just the sayings. They are the Mahavakyas. Those are the experience of those yogis. And they become free of any kind of agitation. And this, let's just go over this, the knots of the heart again. Even though you all know this, but still it's a good idea to repeat it again. It starts with avidya. Avidya is a spiritual ignorance. You might be very intellectual in this worldly sphere, but we are talking about the spiritual sphere, ignorance. And a consequence of the avidya is desires. And those desires, they create agitations in our intellect. And consequently, at the bodily level, we just work. So avidya, kam, and karam. These are the three knots of the heart. So remember this: spiritual ignorance, intellectual desires, and mental agitations and physical activities. That's what he's talking about. And in the last few verses, that's what he's saying. Because the intellect plans to gain perfection, completeness through its desires. Because that intellect has not discriminated everything completely. And because of the desires, the thoughts in the mind, they keep on rushing us, prompting us towards the actions. So this is a triple bondage of spiritual ignorance. Okay, so but he is saying when the non-dual Atma is realized. So on one hand, we are learning, on the other hand, we are practicing, doing this sadhana. And then when the non-dual Atma, the Atma, you have really seen the light of Atma, you have experienced it yourself, and that is a Nirvikalpa Samadhi. All the Vikalaps, they end. And the heart's knots of ignorance are completely destroyed. Okay. Now in the next verse, he says, Tvam aham idam iti iyam kalpanaha buddhi doshat prabhavati paramatmani adve nirvisheshe pravilasati samadhau asya sarvaha vikalpaha vilayanam upgachet vastu tatvadritya. Tvam means you. Aham, I. Idam, this. Iti, thus. Again, iyam, this. Kalpana, imagination. Buddhi doshat. See, dosh is a defect. So buddhi doshat, due to the defects of the intellect. Prabhavati is fancied. Paramatmani, in the Supreme Self. Adve, in the non-dual. Adve. See, dve means two. When you put a in front of it, it's opposite of it. So non-dual. Nirvisheshe, the attributeless. Pravilasti samadhau, when the truth is realized in samadhi. You're all familiar with the term, dharana, dhyan, samadhi. Asya, his, that means seekers. Sarva, all. Vikalpaha, the concepts. Vilayanam, dissolution. Upgachet, attain. Vastu tattva drityaha, by the discrimination of the truth of the thing. From the apprehension of the reality, of the real nature of the self. Pravilasati. Somebody asked what is pravilasati. Pravilasati is truth, realization of the truth. That is pravilasati. Okay, so together pravilasti samadhi is when the truth is realized in samadhi. So in samadhi, that truth is realized. Okay, you, I, this, that. These concepts are fancied in the Supreme Self, which is absolute and non-dual, due to inherent defects of the intellect. Okay, so what he's saying is that this is only one, non-dual, but we keep on saying you and I, this and that. When the real nature of Ram is realized in Samadhi, all these concepts are dissolved. So the imperfection of the intellect, the defects in our intellect, and what is that? Those are the vasanas. That is the ignorance. Those are the desires. Due to all that, this mind keeps on imagining. That is fancied. So we perceive this world of polarity. Constantly we live with this you and I, this and that. This indicates any object very near to us, this. And that indicates any object which is a little away from us, this and that. And this and that concept creates the concept of time and space. That's how the objects are imagined. Okay? And this imagination takes us so far away from the reality. And more imagination, more fluctuations in our mind. So that's why he's using this word Nirvikalpa Samadhi or Pravilasti Samadhi. So when the real nature of the self is experienced, all these disturbances are completely dissolved. And through the state of complete mental equanimity, when the thoughts don't go here and there, you can experience the infinitude, the Brahman. Because otherwise, constantly there is a subject-object play in the mind. And because of these objects, we don't pay attention to the subject, the self, the reality. So when the self, which is the substratum for both the subject and its field, is realized, mind becomes calm. Okay. Now again, he's taking our attention towards some of the qualities we need to cultivate. Because it sounds great to have a Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but in order to reach there, we got to have some qualities. Okay, so he says Shantaha, Dantaha, Param Uprata, Kashanti Yuktaha, Samadhim Kurvan, Nityam Kalyati, Yati Svasya, Sarvatma Bhavam, Ten Avidya Timir Janitan, Sadhu Dagdvaha, Vikalpan, Brahm Akrityaha, Nivasti, Sukham Nishkriyaha, Vikalpaha. So pretty long verse. But if you look at each word separately, you're all familiar with these terms. Shant. Shant is serene. Danta, self-controlled. Okay, so this Danta is just like a Daman, Dhamma. And Shanta is like a Shama. Param Uprataha, perfectly withdrawn. Withdrawn from where? From the objects. Perfectly withdrawn. Kashanti Yuktaha, steadfast in forbearance. This is another term for Tidiksha. Forbearance. Samadhyam Kurvan, practicing meditation. Nityam, always. Kalyati, contemplates. Yati, the seeker, yatan karne wala, yati. Savasya, his own. Sarva Atma Bhavam, the nature of being the self of all. Ten means by this. Avidya Timir Janitan. Avidya is the ignorance. Timir. Timir is like a blindness, darkness. Janitan, rising. So it's a rising from the blindness of ignorance. Sadhu, very well. Dagdva, destroying. Vikalpan, imaginations. Brahmakrityaha, as Brahma. Nivasati, lives. Sukham, blissfully. Nishkriya, actionless. Nirvikalpaha, free from duality or free from the oscillations of our mind. Serene, self-controlled. Perfectly withdrawn from sense objects. Steadfast and silently enduring. Struggling to attain samadhi. The seeker always contemplates on his own self as the self in the universe. Destroying by these means all imaginations which arise from the blindness of ignorance. He lives blissfully as Brahma, free from egocentric actions and oscillations of the mind. Okay? So there's a lot said in this verse. Sure, when we are just starting out on this journey, it seems impossible. How can we function in this world? Because he says always. So that's why I would say let's start practicing this during our meditations, during our prayers, during our simple chores which we do all day long. It could be cooking, it could be taking a bath, it could be walking outside. At that time we can do it. Sure, when we are working on a serious project, maybe we can't. Or where we are having conversation with somebody. But we'll see the effect of this practice, even here and there, will give us calmness, more clarity. This ignorance will dissolve away. Okay? So, in order to be successful in our meditations, we should have these fundamental qualities. And this is what he's mentioning over here. Very important verse. For a sadhak who is a serious sadhak, serious seeker, maybe meditating right now, but if we want to take our meditation into that level of samadhi, especially the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we have to take it seriously, what he's telling us. So, Shant. Can we say that we are Shant Swabhav? Some people, we see them and they are very Shant no matter what. We got to see, do we have that quality? Because mind has to be trained not to run after the sense objects. Because why does the mind run outside? It just thinks that that object is going to give me happiness. So we have to train our mind not to run into that outside world. If it needs to go there, sure, take it there. But imagining that if I have this, if I do this, I'll be happy. Stop that. That's a sadhana. And then control of the sense organs, dantaha. Because objects enter through the senses. Eyes are looking at it without any discrimination. The imprints are being put into the mind. So we have to control our senses. Okay. So, Shant and Dant. And next one he says, Param Uprati. Total withdrawal from mental preoccupation. This also we need to practice. Mind which likes to just roam into the worldly objects, worldly situations, uprati, tell that mind to take pleasure in thinking about God. That is the reason God takes the avatar, so that we have something to think about. It could be Krishna Leela. It could be the stories of Ram avatar or stories of your own Guru. Take Rati in there instead of worldly things. So Uparati. So this needs to be practiced and perfected so that mind may not go outside into the sense enjoyments of the past or into the future indulgences. Normally that's what mind does. Okay, so Uparati. And then fourth one he is mentioning in this verse is Kashanti Yuktaha, forbearance. This is also a great quality, very essential, because whatever is happening in our life is because of some reason. Bear the ups and downs of your life as a sadhak. Accept it, whatever is happening, without blaming anybody else or even God or the stars. That is a forbearance. Kashanti Yuktaha. So in this verse, he is mentioning only 4. In the beginning of the scripture, he mentioned 6. Sham, Dam, Uprati, Titiksha. Then he said faith, Shraddha, and Samadhan. These are the 6 qualifications. When a seeker realizes that self in him is the self everywhere, the bondages which are born out of the ignorance, he says blindness over here. This ignorance has made us blind. He says all that blindness gets burnt down. Then he says that Mahatma lives very content and blissful. That is a Mahatma. He has lifted himself up to the state of Brahma. He has become Brahma. Okay. So it's not that difficult of a verse, but if we know that these are the qualifications we need to cultivate, and what happens when we have these qualifications and we keep on practicing with the help of that, then ignorance is gone. God doesn't have to come from somewhere else. God resides here. In fact, our great rishis, they said, all the devatas reside in your body. Brahma is there, Ganeshji is there, Vishnu is there, Shivji is there, your Guru is there, Brahma is there, everything is there. Deho devalya prokta. But if our mind is still, mind is calm, only then we'll be able to experience this. Okay. Let's look at next verse. Samahita ye pravilapye bahyam shrotradi chetaha swam aham chidatmani te eva muktaha bhav pash bandhai na anye tu purokshe katha abhidhayana. Samahita. Samatha is when you combine something, when you hold something together. Samahita. Ye means those who, like those people. That's what really means ye. Pravilapye, having merged. Bahyam, the external world. Shrotradi, the ears, etc. So that really means the sense organs, because the ears are the sense organs. Chetah, the mind. Swam aham, the very ego itself. Chid Atmani, in the self, which is knowledge absolute. Chid Atmani, in the self, which is knowledge absolute. Te means they, Ev means alone, Muktaha, are freed. Bhava pash bandhe, from the bondages of becoming. That means birth and death. Bhav pash bandhe, like a birth and death, coming and going. Na means not, anye others. Tu means but. Prokshe katha bhidayana, who blabber their indirect knowledge. Shankaracharya ji is saying they alone are free from the bondage of birth and death, who, having attained samadhi, merge the objective world, the sense organs, the mind. He says the very ego also. Where did they merge it? In the Atma, the knowledge absolute. And none else who blabber their indirect knowledge. Okay? Anytime we come here into this existence, there's always sorrow. So that's why he says forever the sorrows of the birth and death. There's a total merger of the experience and the world of objects experienced in the self in samadhi. Until a person has this experience of samadhi, a person will function in the field of time and space and continue to experience this change. That is a bhav bandh pasha. It's almost like only when we awake, we get up out of the dream, then we realize that was just a dream. Okay? So till we subjectively gain a direct experience of the self, all scriptural declarations are empty noises. Okay? So we got to have this experience, otherwise it's indirect knowledge, somebody else's experience. Sure, we get guidance from a guru's experience or these rishis' experience. We do get, but for our experience, we need to practice. We need to cultivate those qualities. Because otherwise, no matter how eloquently we can talk about it, we can discuss it, it is indirect knowledge. That's what he means over here. Indirect blabbering. Okay. Let's look at next one. Upadhi bhedat swayamev bhidyate cha upadhi apohe swayam ev kevlah tasmat upadhe vilyay vidwan vaset sada akalap samadhi nishtaya. Upadhi bhedat, through the many conditionings or limitations. Okay? So through the many conditioning, upadhi bhedat. And simply to understand what upadhi is this body of ours, mind, intellect, those are all upadhis. Okay? Upadhi bhedat. Swayam ev, the self itself. Bhidyate is diversified. Cha means and. Upadhi apohe, when the conditionings are negated or dissolved. That means non-identification with all the upadhis. Swayam eva, itself. Kevalaha, one without differences, keval only. Tasmat, therefore, upadhe, of the conditionings. Vilayaye, for the dissolution. Vidwan, the wise person. Vaset, must devote. Sada means always. Akalap samadhi nishtaya, to the practice of, see over here now, akalap. This is like a nirvikalap, the same thing. So different terms. To the practice of nirvikalap samadhi. Okay, one-pointed absorption. Through the many conditionings, a person is apt to think of his own self as full of diversity. But by removing these, he gains his own immutable self. So that means we got to peel the layers of these upadhis. Therefore, for the dissolution of his conditionings, the wise person must devote himself to the practice of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Okay. If you remember in the Yoga Sutras, in the first chapter, Rishi Patanjali talked about Savikalp and Nirvikalpa Samadhi extensively. Okay. Over here, he's not talking much about the different layers of samadhis, but he's taking us up to that level, the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Okay. Because if there's only one infinite, eternal truth, why do we see diversity? Diversity is seen because of the conditionings, the upadhis. In the scriptures, they say upadhi is equal to Maya Panchakosha Rupo Upadhi. Okay, even in our body also, there's a Panchakosha. That's all Upadhi. And what are these Panchakosha? Anmaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, Anandamaya Kosha. Those are all Upadhis. So the conditionings are the Maya created. It has created the personality layers. And that's how we see the pluralistic world also. So we need to do the sadhana where we can have to that level, do not stop. Sure, we got to use the vikalaps first. When we use the mantra, when we use the form, when we use any other kind of some kind of a gadget outside, ultimately we got to let those go. Nirvikalpa is only one. Okay, so with the conditionings, the upadhis, we need to remove them, because otherwise there's always an identification with the upadhis. This is also upadhi. Hame Krishna Bhagat, hame Ram Bhagat. Those are upadhis too, by the way. Hame Hanuman Bhagat on certain days and Shiv Bhagat on other days. Those are all upadhis. To rise above that, to the Keval only. That's why Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, Ananya Bhakti, he talked about. Ananya, just one. Only one, both within and without. So the wise student, in order to end his false identifications with the conditioning, in order to withdraw from the upadhis, must constantly practice towards this Nirvikalpa Samadhi. We need to bring the mind completely and absolutely silent. So that means not only during the meditation, not only during the prayers, we got to see other times also, is my mind silent or not? What is it doing? Is it creating a mischief? If we can watch our mind, other times also you will see that it will behave during our sadhana also. Do not give your mind a free rein to go wherever it wants to go. We should cultivate this habit. Cultivate this habit of turning our mind into inner quietude. This is the practice of samadhi. This is called samadhi nishtha. Nishtha. Nishtha means nitaram sthiti, continuous, consistent, steady, firmly established. Nishtha is a firmness, firmly established in this practice. And Nirvikalpa Samadhi indicates that state where a person has negated all the disturbances, all the agitations from the mind. Continuously live in this kind of awareness. And he says this is the only method. This is the only way we can do it. We cannot just imagine that 5, 10, 15 minutes a day I'm going to do it and I'll reach the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. No. Other times also. The surroundings in our house, because whatever we see, it's putting an impression on us. Do we have a sattvic atmosphere in our house or not? How much TV we watch? And what do we watch on TV? What kind of a friends we have? What kind of a books we read? What kind of a food we eat? What kind of a clothes we wear? Our entertainments, all of that has impact on our mind. So if we want to reach this Nirvikalpa Samadhi state, we got to take it seriously. And he says, that student is a wise student. Because this wise student, he has ended his false identification with the conditionings, the upadhis. Even though I don't want to stop, but let's stop. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnase Purnamadaya Purnameva Visheshyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.